Captain Sarah Chen stared out the viewport of the patrol ship Defiant Spirit and watched another cargo hauler disappear into hyperspace. The massive vessel belonged to the Vexhai Dominion, its crystal hull gleaming with patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Inside that ship were rare metals mined by human workers on the frontier worlds, destined for Vexhai military shipyards where they would build warships humans would never be allowed to command. 300 years. That was how long humanity had been part of the Galactic Council, and they were still treated like children playing with toys too dangerous for them to understand. The other species spoke of humans in whispers, calling them violent and unpredictable. They gave humans the jobs nobody else wanted and kept them far from anything that mattered. Sarah had grown up hearing stories about the early days when humans first made contact with galactic civilization. Back then, human ambassadors had been excited to join something bigger than themselves. They thought they would learn from ancient wisdom and advanced technology. Instead, they found themselves at the bottom of a hierarchy that had existed for millions of years. The galaxy was ruled by three great powers. The Vexhai Dominion controlled most of the inner systems with their crystal ships and perfect strategic minds. Every Vexhai was born with the ability to see thousands of possible futures and choose the path that led to victory. They never lost battles because they never fought battles they could not win. The Zephyrian Collective dominated the Outer Rim with their hive mind technology. Billions of individual Zephyrians shared one consciousness, making them perfect for managing vast industrial operations and scientific research. They could coordinate fleets across entire sectors with the precision of a single mind controlling multiple bodies. The ethereal conclave were the oldest and most mysterious. They had abandoned physical bodies long ago and existed as pure energy. They claimed to have been watching the galaxy since before most stars were born. Other species went to them for guidance on matters too complex for younger races to understand. And then, there were humans. Violent, chaotic, short-lived humans who could barely agree among themselves, let alone coordinate with alien minds. The Council had given them mining rights on dead worlds and permission to run cargo between systems nobody else cared about. Human colonies were allowed to exist as long as they stayed quiet and did not cause trouble. Sarah's crew consisted of 12 humans from different colony worlds. They were good people, but she could see the frustration in their eyes every day. Her pilot, James Rodriguez, had applied to join a Vexhai exploration fleet 5 times and been rejected each time. Her engineer, Dr. Lisa Park, had developed new shield technologies that the Zephyrians had claimed credit for before burying the research. Her weapons officer, Marcus Thompson, had trained for years to qualify for Council military service, only to be told that humans were too emotionally unstable for combat roles. The Defiant Spirit was classified as a patrol vessel, but it was barely more than a cargo hauler with some basic weapons attached. The Council allowed humans to police their own shipping lanes and investigate minor incidents in systems where nothing important ever happened. It was busy work, designed to make humans feel useful while keeping them away from real responsibility. Sarah was reviewing the day's patrol reports when her sensor officer spoke up. "Captain, I'm picking up some strange readings from the Kepler 442 system." Sarah looked at the navigation display. Kepler 442 was a dead system, with no planets capable of supporting life. Its star had burned out millions of years ago, leaving behind a cold white dwarf surrounded by asteroids and frozen rocks. Nothing ever happened there. "What kind of readings?" Sarah asked. "Energy signatures unlike anything in our database. They're not matching any known technology, not even ethereal conclave energy patterns." Dr. Park looked up from her engineering station. "The readings are getting stronger. Whatever it is, it's big." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. According to regulations, she should have reported the anomaly to the nearest Council monitoring station and waited for instructions. Instead, she ordered her crew to investigate directly. Maybe it was the years of frustration talking, or maybe it was simple human curiosity, but she wanted to see what was happening for herself. The Defiant Spirit dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. What they found there made no sense according to any known science. Space itself was torn open, not like a hyperspace rift or dimensional portal, but actually torn, as if reality was a piece of fabric that something had clawed through. The tiers were perfectly black, so dark that they seemed to absorb light from the dead star. Energy readings spiked off their instruments as massive shapes began to emerge from the openings. The things that came through were impossible to describe in words any human language possessed. They were not ships or creatures or machines, but something that existed in categories the mind could not process. They moved without engines, communicated without signals, and seemed to bend the laws of physics simply by existing. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear, "those things are scanning us." Sarah felt something touch her mind. It was not telepathy like the ethereal conclave used, but something deeper and more invasive. For a moment she experienced existence from a perspective that was not human, not even biological. She saw the universe as a collection of resources to be consumed, energy patterns to be absorbed, and matter to be converted into something else entirely. Then the contact broke, leaving her gasping and shaking. "Get us out of here," she ordered. "Maximum acceleration. Send an emergency transmission to Council headquarters." As the defiant spirit fled the system, Sarah watched the entities behind them begin to move toward the dead star. Whatever they were not interested in human ships or human worlds. They wanted something much bigger. The transmission Sarah sent would take 3 days to reach the nearest Council monitoring station. By then, the Kepler 442 system would be gone, consumed by beings that existed beyond the understanding of any galactic civilization. The entities Sarah had discovered were called many things by the species that encountered them in the following weeks. The Vexhi named them pattern breakers because they made strategic prediction impossible. The Zephyrians called them mind silence because their hive consciousness could not touch them. The ethereal conclave simply referred to them as the end of understanding. But the name that stuck, the one that appeared in every report and emergency broadcast across the galaxy, was the one Sarah Chen had written in her initial contact report: the Devourers. Within a month, 17 star systems had gone dark. The Devourers moved from system to system, consuming everything they found. Stars, planets, space stations, fleets, entire civilizations. Nothing could resist them. They did not communicate, negotiate, or show mercy. They simply consumed and moved on. The Galactic Council called emergency sessions. The 3 great powers put aside centuries of careful diplomacy and began preparing for war. But how do you fight an enemy that treats the laws of physics as suggestions? How do you defeat beings that exist outside the categories of matter and energy? Deep in the archives of the ethereal conclave, ancient records spoke of a time before time, when the universe was young and chaos ruled everything. Those records mentioned entities of pure entropy that had been locked away when order first emerged from the cosmic darkness. The Council began to consider options that would have been unthinkable just months before. And in the human sectors, crews like Sarah's continued their patrols, watching the distant flashes of dying stars and wondering if their small, overlooked civilization would survive what was coming. The Council chamber on Nexus Prime had not seen this much activity in 1,000 years. Representatives from every major civilization filled the vast amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of sounds that the translation systems struggled to process. Fear hung in the air like a toxic cloud. High Strategist Zarthol of the Vexhi Dominion stood before the central podium, his crystal body reflecting the emergency lighting in sharp, painful patterns. His species had spent millions of years perfecting the art of seeing all possible futures, but when he looked ahead now, he saw only darkness. 63 systems have fallen in the past month, he announced, his voice carrying the harmonic frequencies that all Vexhi used for important communications. The entities we call Devourers show no pattern we can predict, no strategy we can counter. They consume everything and move on, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The Zephyrian representative, a tall figure whose body flickered between solid matter and energy patterns, spoke next. Its voice was actually the voice of billions, all speaking in perfect unison. Our collective consciousness cannot touch these beings. They exist outside the network of thought that connects all intelligent life. When we attempt to scan them, we find only void where minds should be. Whispers filled the chamber. The Zephyrian collective had never encountered anything their hive mind could not at least partially understand. Their technology was based on the principle that all consciousness was connected at some fundamental level. If that principle was wrong, then everything they had built was meaningless. The ethereal conclave's representative was a shifting column. of pure energy that spoke directly into the minds of everyone present. Its words carried the weight of eons and the sadness of a race that had seen too much. "We have consulted the oldest archives," the ethereal said. "Records from the time before stars, when the universe was young and chaos ruled all things. These entities are mentioned in texts so ancient that we had believed them to be mythology. They are called by many names, but they all mean the same thing: the first hunger." The chamber fell silent. Even the humans in their small section stopped their quiet conversations and listened. "According to these records," the ethereal continued, "the first hunger consumed the early universe until the fundamental forces themselves rose up to stop them. They were not destroyed, because destruction implies that they existed in the first place. Instead, they were locked away in spaces between spaces, in the void that exists beneath reality itself." High Strategist Zarthul's crystal body pulsed with agitation. Then how are they here now? What released them? The ethereal's energy patterns shifted into configurations that hurt to look at directly. "We believe they were never truly imprisoned. Something has been keeping them asleep, and now they have awakened. Our analysis suggests that galactic civilization itself may have disturbed whatever forces were containing them." The implications hit everyone at once. 3 billion years of advancing technology and expanding civilizations had somehow awakened the things that ate universes. Every achievement, every discovery, every step forward had brought them closer to this moment. A Vex-High strategic analyst spoke up from the lower tiers. "If these entities predate the establishment of physical laws, then conventional warfare is impossible. We need weapons that operate outside the normal understanding of reality." "Impossible," the Zephyrian collective responded. "No such weapons exist." But the ethereal conclave representative pulsed with something that might have been grim determination. "There is one possibility. In the deepest archives, sealed behind warnings written in languages that predate speech itself, we have records of entities that were locked away alongside the first hunger. Not because they were imprisoned, but because they were too dangerous to exist in an ordered universe." The chamber erupted in voices as representatives demanded to know more. The ethereal waited for silence before continuing. "They are called the Harbingers, beings of pure entropy who exist to unmake reality itself. They were sealed away because their very presence causes the breakdown of physical laws, but they might be the only force capable of fighting the first hunger on equal terms." High Strategist Zarthul's entire body went dark, then blazed with urgent light patterns. "You are suggesting we release entities of chaos to fight entities of hunger? That is not strategy. That is suicide."
"It is the only option we have," the ethereal replied. "The Harbingers can be controlled if the proper rituals are observed. Ancient texts describe binding mechanisms that force them to serve specific purposes. We can aim them at the first hunger,
"And seal them away again when the threat is eliminated." The debate that followed lasted for 18 hours. Species that had not spoken to each other in centuries found themselves arguing for the survival of everything they had ever known. Some called for evacuation beyond the galactic rim. Others suggested trying to communicate with the first hunger, to find some way to negotiate or appease them. In the end, fear won. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Galactic Council authorized the release of the Harbingers under strict controls and binding rituals that had not been used since the early days of the universe. The humans voted against the proposal. Captain Sarah Chen spoke for her species when the time came to explain their position. "We have studied the historical records available to us," she said, standing in the section reserved for minor civilizations. "Every time someone in galactic history has tried to solve one crisis by creating another, the results have been worse than the original problem." High Strategist Zarthul's patterns shifted to indicate polite dismissal. "With respect, Captain Chen, humanity lacks the strategic experience to understand the complexities of this decision. Your species has never faced an extinction-level threat before." Sarah's response was quiet, but carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "No, we have never faced extinction from outside forces, but we have spent our entire history learning to survive our own destructive impulses. We know what happens when you unleash chaos and hope to control it. The older civilizations ignored the human warning. They had been managing galactic affairs for millions of years while humans were still learning to make fire. What could a species barely 3 centuries into space travel possibly understand? About cosmic threats? The release took place in the empty space between galaxies far from any inhabited systems. Ancient ethereal archives provided the binding rituals and containment mechanisms. The most powerful vessels from all 3 major civilizations formed a perimeter around the ritual site, their weapons trained on the point where the harbingers would emerge. When the seals were broken, reality screamed. The harbingers came through not as individual entities but as a wave of pure chaos that made the laws of physics forget how to work. Ships that had been solid became probability clouds. Space itself began to age and decay. The carefully prepared binding rituals lasted exactly 17 seconds before the harbingers tore through them like tissue paper. What emerged was not a controllable weapon, but a force of absolute entropy that looked at the ordered universe and found it personally offensive. The harbingers began unmaking reality on a fundamental level, turning matter back into the quantum foam from which it had originally condensed. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was when the scanning arrays detected new signals coming from the areas where the first hunger had been feeding. The entities the galaxy had called devourers were not the main threat. They were scouts, and their masters had felt the release of the harbingers from across the universe. The real invasion was about to begin. Within hours of the harbingers' release, both forces began working together to tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. The galaxy's greatest civilizations watched in horror as their most powerful fleets simply ceased to exist when they encountered the chaos zones spreading out from both groups of entities. The Galactic Council had tried to fight fire with fire, and succeeded only in burning down everything they had spent millions of years building. The message reached Earth at 0347 hours, transmitted on emergency frequencies that had not been used since the first contact protocols were established 3 centuries ago. Admiral Marcus Torres was pulled from sleep by his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Walsh, who looked like she had seen a ghost. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," she said, handing him a sealed data pad. "It's from the Galactic Council inner chamber, addressed specifically to the Terran Federation High Command." Torres sat up, suddenly wide awake. In 300 years of membership, humans had never received direct communication from the inner chamber. They sent requests through intermediaries and received responses through automated systems. The inner chamber was where the real decisions were made, by species that considered humans too primitive to be worth their direct attention. He activated the data pad and felt his world shift. The message was from High Strategist Zarthul himself, speaking directly to the camera with his crystal body showing stress patterns that Torres had never seen before. Behind him, the council chamber was in chaos, with representatives from dozens of species arguing in languages that the translation system could barely process. "Admiral Torres of the Terran Federation," Zarthul began, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of desperation. "I am contacting you on behalf of the Galactic Council Inner Chamber to request immediate military assistance. The situation has deteriorated beyond our ability to contain." Torres paused the message and looked at Walsh. "How bad is it out there?" "Sir, we've lost contact with 17 human colonies in the past week. Not destroyed, just gone. No distress signals, no debris fields, nothing. And the reports coming in from the inner systems..." She hesitated. "Sir, the Vexhi have lost half their fleet. The Zephyrian collective is fragmenting. Their hive mind is actually breaking apart." Torres restarted the message. Zarthul was showing tactical displays that made no sense. Battle formations where ships existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Star charts where entire systems had been replaced by empty space that bent light in impossible directions. Sensor readings that violated every known law of physics. "The entities we released have joined with the original threat," Zarthul continued. "Our strategic predictions are useless. Our technology fails when it encounters them. Our most powerful weapons pass through them without effect. We have tried every conventional approach and failed." The display switched to show the current state of the galaxy. Red zones spread out from dozens of points, marking areas where reality itself had become unstable. Some zones were expanding slowly, consuming a star system every few days. Others pulsed with chaotic energy that made hyperspace travel impossible. The safe areas were shrinking rapidly. "We have analyzed every option available to our civilizations," Zarthul said. "There is only one force in the galaxy that might be capable of fighting these entities effectively: humanity." Torres nearly dropped the datapad. "Say that again." "Your species has always been considered too violent for positions of military authority, too chaotic to be trusted with advanced weapons, too unpredictable to be given command responsibilities. These traits that we have feared may now be our salvation." The message switched to show combat analysis from the few encounters where human ships had faced the Chaos entities. The results were startling. While Vex-High vessels with their perfect strategic programming were destroyed instantly, human ships that relied on adaptability and improvisation lasted longer. Not long enough to win, but long enough to gather data. Human crews show an unusual ability to function in chaotic environments, Zarthul explained. "Your tactical thinking does not follow predictable patterns, which makes it difficult for these entities to counter. Most importantly, your species treats impossible situations as challenges rather than reasons for despair." Torres found himself laughing, a sound with no humor in it. For 3 centuries, everything that made humans human had been treated as a flaw by galactic civilization. Their tendency toward violence, their refusal to accept defeat, their ability to find opportunity in disaster. All of it had been seen as evidence that humans were not ready for the responsibilities of advanced species. Now, those same traits might be the galaxy's only hope. The message concluded with something Torres had never expected to hear from a galactic leader. "The Inner Chamber formally requests that the Terran Federation assume command of all Council military forces for the duration of this crisis. We will provide full access to our technology, our strategic databases, and our manufacturing capabilities. We ask only that you help us survive what we have unleashed." Torres set down the datapad and looked at Walsh. "Get me a connection to every human fleet commander in the galaxy, full encryption, priority alpha, and wake up the Joint Chiefs. We have work to do." "Sir, what are your orders?" "We're going to do something we should have done 300 years ago," Torres said, standing and reaching for his uniform. "We're going to show this galaxy what humans are really capable of when someone gives us a proper war to fight." The response from the Terran Federation came 6 hours later, delivered personally by Admiral Torres to the Council chamber on Nexus Prime. He stood at the podium where he had never been allowed to speak before, looking out at representatives of species that had treated his people as second-class citizens for centuries. "The Terran Federation accepts operational command of all Council military forces," he announced. "But we do this on our terms." High Strategist Zarthul's crystal body pulsed with relief. "State your requirements." "First, full access to all military technology and strategic resources with no restrictions and no oversight. Second, complete tactical autonomy. Human commanders will answer only to human authority during combat operations. Third, when this war is over, humanity will be recognized as an equal member of the Inner Chamber, with full voting rights and strategic authority." The chamber erupted in arguments. Representatives who had spent millions of years at the top of the galactic hierarchy were being asked to hand over their military forces to a species they considered barely civilized. But the red zones on the tactical displays were growing larger every hour, and conventional approaches had failed completely. "These terms are acceptable," Zarthul said, his voice cutting through the noise. "What do you need from us?" Torres smiled, and several alien representatives moved back instinctively. There was something in that expression that spoke of ancient hunts and forgotten wars, of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its homeworld's food chain through sheer bloody-minded determination. "Give us your best ships and your most advanced weapons," Torres said. "Then get out of our way and let us do what humans do best." "Which is?" "Win impossible wars." Within 24 hours, human officers were arriving at major military installations across the galaxy. They came not as advisors or support personnel, but as commanding officers with full authority over alien fleets that dwarfed anything in human space. Crews that had served together for centuries found themselves taking orders from beings they had been taught to consider primitive and dangerous. The results were immediate and dramatic. Human tactical thinking, unconstrained by millions of years of strategic doctrine, began developing new approaches to fighting entities that existed outside normal spacetime. They analyzed the chaos zones not as obstacles to avoid, but as weapons to be turned against their creators. For the first time since the crisis began, the red zones stopped expanding. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see if the violent, chaotic humans could succeed where ancient wisdom had failed. In the human sectors, news of the military conscription was met with grim satisfaction. Finally, after 3 centuries of being told they were too dangerous for important work, humans had been given a job that matched their talents. They intended to do it very, very well. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Spite Incarnate and watched reality twist itself into knots around her ship. The vessel had been built in the Vex-High shipyards using crystalline technology that could predict enemy movements across multiple timelines. But the human crew had made modifications that would have horrified its original designers. Where Vex-High engineers had installed perfect strategic computers, humans had added chaos generators that deliberately introduced random variables into every calculation. Where the original design called for harmonious crystal resonance chambers, humans had installed what they cheerfully called spite drives, engines that ran on pure human stubbornness and refused to follow normal physics when it was inconvenient, contact-bearing. 27 Mark IV, her sensor officer reported. It's a Harbinger vessel class. Captain, I don't think it has a class. It exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and my instruments are having what I can only describe as a nervous breakdown. Sarah nodded calmly. After 6 months of fighting entities that treated the laws of physics as polite suggestions, her crew had learned to roll with impossibilities. Can we board it? Ma'am, it doesn't have a physical structure in the traditional sense. It's more like a mathematical concept that happens to be really angry. Perfect, Sarah said. Prep the boarding teams. The transformation of galactic military doctrine under human leadership had been swift and brutal. While other species had tried to fight chaos entities using order and precision, humans had embraced chaos as a tactical advantage. They developed weapons that fired concentrated spite, engines that ran on human determination, and armor that got stronger the more angry its wearer became. The boarding teams that launched from the Spite Incarnate wore suits designed by Dr. Lisa Park, now head of Human Adaptive Technologies Division. The suits existed in a quantum state between solid matter and pure human willpower, allowing their wearers to function in environments where reality itself was having an existential crisis. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson led the assault team through dimensions that had no names, following corridors that existed only when someone was walking down them. His squad moved with the easy confidence of humans who had stopped being surprised by impossible things and started treating them as interesting puzzles to solve. Contact ahead, Thompson reported. Harbinger entities, approximately. Well, they keep changing number. Sometimes there's 3 of them. Sometimes there's -4. But they all look really annoyed that we're here. Understood, Sarah replied from the bridge. Remember, these things feed on despair and certainty. Give them chaos and spite instead. The battle that followed would have been incomprehensible to the galactic civilizations that had ruled for millions of years. Thompson's squad fought beings of pure entropy, using weapons that should not have worked, and tactics that violated every principle of military strategy. When one Harbinger tried to unmake reality around them, the humans simply refused to acknowledge that reality had rules in the first place. Sergeant Maria Santos used a weapon that fired crystallized human sarcasm, each shot carrying enough concentrated disbelief to make chaos entities question their own existence. Corporal David Kim deployed mines that exploded into pockets of Murphy's Law, causing anything that could go wrong to go wrong for everyone except the humans, who had built their entire military doctrine around the assumption that everything would go wrong anyway. The fight moved through spaces that existed between thoughts, across battlefields made of crystallized time, and into chambers where the concept of existence itself was kept in filing cabinets. Through it all, the human assault team pressed forward with the relentless determination of a species that had learned to treat impossible odds as a starting point rather than an ending. When they finally cornered the Harbinger command entity in what might have been the center of the ship, or possibly the ship's opinion of what a center should look like, it tried to speak directly into their minds. Why do you not despair? It asked, its voice carrying the weight of entropy itself. I have shown you the futility of existence, the meaninglessness of order, the inevitable triumph of chaos over all things. Why do you still fight? Thompson removed his helmet. revealing a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by cosmic horror. Because, he said, we're humans. We looked at a universe that was actively trying to kill us and decided to live here anyway. We built civilizations on worlds that were on fire, in oceans that were trying to drown us, and in the middle of ice ages that should have wiped us out. You think showing us a little chaos is going to make us give up? The Harbinger entity actually paused, which was remarkable since it existed outside the normal flow of time. But I am entropy incarnate. I am the heat death of the universe made manifest. I am the end of all things, yeah, Santos said, checking her weapon's charge level. We've met entropy before. We call it Tuesday. Now are you going to surrender, or do we have to get creative? What followed was the first recorded instance of a fundamental force of the universe surrendering to a squad of infantry. The Harbinger entity, faced with humans who treated its cosmic significance as a minor inconvenience, simply gave up trying to unmake reality and allowed itself to be contained in a storage device that Dr. Park had built using spare parts and what she called applied human determination. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human forces engaged chaos entities that had never encountered anything like them. The Devourers, beings that consumed entire star systems, found themselves being hunted by human fleets that treated interstellar warfare as a combination of naval tactics and extreme sports that Admiral Torres commanded. The campaign from the bridge of the inexorable human tendency, a super dreadnought that had been assembled from the wreckage of Vex-High strategic vessels and powered by engines that ran on pure human spite. His tactical displays showed battles raging across 17 sectors, with human forces systematically tracking down entities that existed outside normal spacetime. Report from Sector 7, his communications officer announced. Captain Williams has successfully destroyed a devourer entity that was eating the Rigel system. Her method involved launching her ship directly into its feeding mechanism while playing something called death metal at maximum volume. Did it work? Torres asked. The devourer appears to have died of what our xenobiologists are calling acute cultural poisoning. Also, Captain Williams is requesting permission to try the same tactic on a cluster of Harbingers in Sector 12. Granted. What about the Nexus Prime Theater? Captain Chen reports that her boarding teams have successfully captured 17 Harbinger entities and convinced 3 more to switch sides. Apparently, they were impressed by humanity's approach to existential warfare. Torres nodded with satisfaction. Around the galaxy, human forces were doing what they did best, taking impossible situations and making them work through sheer bloody-minded determination. They fought chaos entities with chaos tactics, entropy beings with entropy weapons, and creatures of pure spite with even purer spite. The other galactic civilizations watched in amazement as their primitive allies systematically dismantled threats that had seemed unstoppable. Human crews took vessels designed for precision warfare and turned them into chaos generators. They modified Zephyrian hive mind technology to create weapons that fired concentrated human stubbornness. They used ethereal energy manipulation techniques to build engines that ran on the power of refusing to give up. Most importantly, they approached cosmic horror with the same attitude they had always used when facing impossible odds. They got annoyed at the inconvenience and started looking for creative ways to solve the problem. The tide of war was turning, and for the first time since the crisis began, the galaxy had hope, not the carefully calculated hope of strategic planning or the mystical hope of ancient wisdom, but the raw, stubborn hope of a species that had looked at a hostile universe and decided to make it their home anyway. The final battle took place in a region of space that no longer had coordinates. The last Harbinger command entity had retreated to the void between realities, hoping to escape into dimensions that existed only in theory. What it found there was a human strike team that had followed it beyond the edge of existence itself. Captain Sarah Chen led the assault personally, her team moving through spaces that mathematicians insisted were impossible. They had modified their equipment one last time, using technology that combined the best of galactic science with what Dr. Park called weaponized human stubbornness. Their suits existed in a quantum state between matter and pure determination, allowing them to function in environments where the concept of existence was negotiable. Target acquired, Chen reported, her voice carrying across dimensions that had no names. It's trying to hide in the space between thoughts, but Lieutenant Rodriguez tracked it down using what he calls applied human curiosity. The Harbinger entity was enormous, a creature of pure entropy that had existed since the universe was young. It had watched galaxies form and die, had seen civilizations rise and fall, had witnessed the birth and death of physical laws themselves, and now it was cornered by a squad of humans who treated cosmic significance as an interesting technical challenge. "This is impossible," the entity said, its voice echoing across realities. "You cannot exist here. This place is outside the boundaries of what your limited minds can comprehend." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Chen replied, checking her weapons charge. "But here's the thing about humans. We specialize in doing things that are supposed to be impossible. It's kind of our whole deal." The battle that followed violated every known law of physics, several unknown ones, and at least 3 mathematical principles that existed only in theory. Chen's team fought an entity that could unmake reality with a thought, using weapons that fired concentrated human spite and armor that got stronger, the more impossible the situation became. When Sergeant Santos was briefly erased from existence, she simply refused to accept it and continued fighting from a state of non-being that confused even the Harbinger. When Corporal Kim was scattered across 17 dimensions, he used the opportunity to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. When the Harbinger tried to convince them that their victory was meaningless in the face of infinite entropy, they responded by singing what Lieutenant Rodriguez cheerfully identified as the most aggressively optimistic song in human history. The end came not with cosmic destruction or reality-shattering explosions, but with something much more human. The Harbinger entity, faced with beings who treated impossible odds as a starting point and cosmic horror as a minor inconvenience, simply gave up. It had spent eons believing in the inevitability of entropy and the meaninglessness of existence, but humans had a way of making even fundamental forces of nature question their life choices. "I surrender," the entity said, its voice carrying millennia of exhaustion. "I cannot comprehend beings who respond to existential meaninglessness with aggressive cheerfulness. Please make it stop." Chen grinned, an expression that somehow managed to be visible across multiple dimensions. "Welcome to dealing with humans. We'll try to make your imprisonment as comfortable as possible." 18 months after the crisis began, the galaxy was finally at peace. The last devourer had been destroyed by Captain Williams, who had developed a tactic she called aggressive friendship that involved ramming chaos entities while broadcasting human music at frequencies that made entropy itself uncomfortable. The surviving Harbingers had been contained using technology that Dr. Park had built, based on the principle that anything could be imprisoned. If you applied enough human determination to the problem, the transformation of galactic civilization was swift and permanent. The old hierarchy that had existed for millions of years was gone, replaced by something that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. Humans were not just accepted as equals. They were recognized as the apex military civilization, the species other races turned to when the impossible needed doing. Admiral Torres found himself in the position he had never expected to hold, Supreme Military Commander of the Galactic Council. His office on Nexus Prime looked out over a spaceport where human-designed vessels moved alongside ships from every major civilization. The designs were distinctive. Where other species built vessels based on mathematical perfection or aesthetic harmony, humans built ships that looked like they were ready for a fight. The quarterly readiness reports, "Sir," his aide announced, handing him a datapad. "Human military doctrines have been adopted by 47 civilizations. Request for additional training programs from another 23. And the HFY Strategic Academy is asking if you would consider teaching a course on applied chaos theory and military applications." Torres reviewed the reports with satisfaction. Human tactical thinking had spread throughout the galaxy, bringing with it concepts that other species had never considered. The idea that impossible odds were an invitation rather than a reason for despair had revolutionized how galactic civilizations approached problems. Military academies that had taught the same strategic principles for millions of years were now offering courses in creative insubordination and advanced stubbornness. Captain Chen had been offered command of the new Chaos Response Division, a joint military force designed to handle threats that existed outside normal understanding. Her headquarters was a space station that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, staffed by beings from dozens of species who had learned to think like humans when faced with cosmic-level problems. "We have 3 new incidents this week," her chief of staff reported during the morning briefing. A star system where the laws of physics are backwards, a region of space that has become sentient and is demanding workers' rights, and what appears to be a cluster of asteroids that have formed a rock band and are playing music so bad it's causing nearby planets to file noise complaints. Standard responses, Chen said calmly. Deploy teams equipped with reality anchors for the backwards physics system. Send a diplomatic team to negotiate with the sentient space region. Make sure they understand labor law. And for the asteroid rock band, well, introduce them to human death metal. Either they'll improve their sound or they'll give up entirely. The incident reports had become routine. Across the galaxy, impossible things happened with increasing frequency, as if the universe itself had learned that humans found impossible situations interesting rather than terrifying. Each incident was handled by teams that combined the best of galactic technology with human approaches to problem solving. In the training centers where new recruits learned to fight cosmic-level threats, instructors from dozens of species taught courses that would have been incomprehensible to the old galactic civilizations. Young beings learned to treat entropy as a tactical resource, to use chaos as a weapon, and to respond to existential horror with what humans called aggressive curiosity. The changes went beyond military applications. Scientific research that had been stagnant for millions of years suddenly exploded with new discoveries, as researchers learned to apply human approaches to impossible problems. Diplomatic protocols were revised to include concepts like constructive stubbornness and weaponized optimism. Even art and culture were transformed as other species learned to appreciate the human aesthetic of making things work despite all reason, but perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed itself. For millions of years, galactic civilization had been built on the assumption that order was good, chaos was bad, and the universe operated according to understandable principles. Humans had introduced a new paradigm. The universe was actively hostile and completely insane, but that just made it more interesting. In a small training facility on the Outer Rim, a young alien cadet named Zixtal raised her hand during a lecture on advanced human military psychology. The instructor, a scarred veteran of the Harbinger War named Colonel Thompson, nodded for her to speak. "Sir, I don't understand why humans are so good at fighting chaos entities and impossible situations. What makes your species different from all the others?" Thompson smiled, an expression that had become famous throughout the galaxy as the look humans got when they were about to explain something that would change how you saw the universe. "Kid, it's not that we're different. It's that we never had the luxury of thinking the universe made sense. Every other species in the galaxy evolved in environments that were basically reasonable. Stable climates, predictable seasons, ecosystems that followed logical patterns. You all developed under the assumption that if you understood the rules, you could succeed." He gestured toward the viewport where Earth was visible as a distant blue dot. Humans evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill us. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, predators that were bigger and stronger and faster than us. We learned very early that the universe doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about fairness, and it certainly doesn't care whether you understand what's happening to you. Zixtal's brow ridges furrowed in concentration. "But how does that help in combat? Because chaos isn't our enemy, kid. Chaos is just Tuesday. Our real enemy has always been boredom.